What's up, my nerds? It has been a minute since we have sat down and looked at the quadcopters, or what the world calls drones these days. I got some fresh gear, the new DJI HD setup. I got myself a new Project 399 build, and we'll dive into it and go through the build itself, as well as some Betaflight settings. So I guess first things first, let's talk a little bit about the build itself. This is a Project 399 Super G frame. This has the heavy-duty, what's touted as the Charlie plates. Jordan at 399 was cool enough to make some heavy-duty plates that are thicker, and they named them after me because I'll be smashing. This has a HOBBYWING XRotor 60-amp 4-in-1, as well as the HOBBYWING flight control that plugs right in, has the pit switch built in, and I am running the DJI HD digital VTX and camera setup, and just some zip ties to mount everything up. This has XRotor. These are 2306 1600 kV because I run these on 6S, and I've been running them on some Intellect Power 1300 milliamp 50C 6S's that do the job quite nicely. I'm going to tear this thing apart. We'll get a look inside, show you how I did the power cap stuff, show you how I have my receiver mounted, and then we'll plug it into Betaflight and look at all of that stuff. So my GoPro mount, this is a piece that Travis drew for me, M0KE, or Moke FPV. Him and I live in the same town, and I fly with him every once in a while, and I harass him long enough to make me these GoPro mounts. It has protective ridges along the edge to keep the GoPro, edges, protected, and I do a zip tie around this way just to keep the extra seatbelt in place. Really, for the most part, the GoPro stays in there pretty good, but we do a lot of tumbling, and I don't want the GoPro to spit out, so I run a seatbelt. But under the top deck, kind of cut this. I like to zip tie my power wire to something on the chassis so that if it goes flying everywhere, there's a zip tie to hold it in place, or at least stop it from catching stuff. But under the top deck, pretty straightforward. On the normal 399 Super G, there's some extra posts in different places. So I just run the front two posts and the rearmost posts, and then I replace the nuts that go above the arm with these shorter standoffs. Reason being, if you flat deck or come down this direction real hard, the top deck won't be able to flex as much because it's going to bottom out on these guys first and not crush any of your valuable items underneath. Now, the next thing in here that I want to talk about is the wiring of the DJI unit to the flight control itself. It's super easy. Basically, there's a power and a ground and two UARTs, and you're done after that. There's a red and a black and a white and a gray, and they go from, red is your power, black is your ground, and then the white and the gray go to the two UARTs. We'll have to get in there and see. I tend to do a little dab of hot glue on top of my sensitive wires like this, so that when they're wiggling around, they don't break there, and they'll wiggle, farther up the wire if they get hit or whatever. There's some protection on these wires. The copters kind of go through a lot. Let's see if we can get in here. And the nice thing about hot glue is you just give it a little wiggle, and it all pretty much peels off without too much effort or hurting of the wires in most situations. So there are 6 wires all together that come out of here. These 2 are for the receiver, the brown and the other brown, I guess you'd say. And the white and the gray are the ones that are used for the OSD stuff that happens, or controls, I'm not exactly sure. But we have the gray one on RX1 and the white one on TX1. So you use UART1, gray is on RX, white is on TX. And then there's 2 wires for, because I'm not using the DJI receiver, which you can. The DJI Air Unit has a radio receiver built in, that if you use their transmitter, it's one less item you have to worry about. For me, I still fly Spectrum stuff, so I got my Spectrum receiver in there, and that's just wired up to power, ground, and then I run RX3, so UART3 RX for my receiver. That's the DJI camera. I haven't had any issues with this. This is the DJI, what they call Air Unit. There's SD card on this side, and there is a USB-C port on this side, and I like zip ties, so I put zip ties around things as added security, but I have that double side taped in. I run my antennas just out the back. You can find 3D prints for the various antenna mounts that are out there. What I did is I took a zip tie, wrapped it around the post and went through itself. So it's just cinched onto the post like this. And then that runs along the antenna lead. And then I just wrap this back on itself, did a zip tie around like that, and then put a big piece of shrink wrap over the top of it. And that has been working pretty good. I've got a couple dozen or more flights on this so far, and these guys have held up pretty good through some pretty good crashing and bashing and tumbles and falls. And other than that, I did move my power cap, and now I'm sure people are cringing at home because of this power cap on the end of wires. If you ever have to remotely mount your power capacitor, it's very important that you use heavy gauge wire and you make it as short as possible with very clean solder joints. I shortened my leads up as much as I could. I soldered, this is 16 gauge wire, or I think maybe it was some motor wire that I had around, but it looks like it's 16 gauge wire. I can't remember, it was months ago. And then I made that pretty much as short as possible. A power cap won't do its job unless it's directly on the speed control. So every time you add a solder joint in there, you're making the power cap less and less effective. A lot of people run their power cap out here. It's super bad. And you definitely don't want to do that because it makes the power cap almost ineffective for what it's really trying to protect it from. Now people say it's voltage spikes, this, that, and the other thing. It's ripple current. Speed control is constantly switching, and it creates a ripple current that likes to damage the speed control. The power capacitor is protecting the speed control from that. The farther away the power capacitor is, the less protection it's able to provide for that effect. So you want to keep that as close as possible. This is my freestyle rig. I don't really rip on it super mega hard, so I think I'm going to be okay with this over here, and thus far I've been flying it for a while now. It's not a super short runtime rig. I get 4 or 5 minutes out of this guy in most situations, so I'm not pushing it super hard, and I think that has been holding up all right. I think that is pretty much all the main things with the build and the components. One other thing, I guess. I run my motor wires right along here and I cover them up in tape to protect them from prop strikes and branches getting cut. If you get little chops and frays in your motor leads while it's running, those little leads touch each other and you can have major problems for your speed control. So I also put a layer of double side tape just on top of the motor wires, and then I tape that on as like a added little shield for the heavy part where the prop is, you know, when you hit something, prop bends and that wants to come down and smash along here. That'll cause some problems and cut the wires and the tape and everything. So I run a thick piece of tape on top of that to help protect it. Of course, I love Azure props. Right now I have 5150s on there. We were out at the coast. It was pretty windy and I wanted to have lots of horsepower for punch outs and some of the low flying that I was doing along the beach. I still hit the sand because I ran out of runtime not paying attention, but so I got a bunch of sand in the motors, which was real nice, and hopefully they hold up all right. I flew it a little bit after the first sand fall, but the last one was pretty rough. It's lawn darted in there pretty good. So that is basic overview of the copter and the setup. Let's go plug this thing into Betaflight and take a look at the various pages and settings. Have the copter plugged into the USB, which is a micro USB, then into the computer, and then Betaflight opens up. If you don't know how that works, you might be in the wrong place. There's lots of other videos that will explain that a lot better than I will. So the big thing with Betaflight that you have to wait for is this little USB guy up here in this top upper corner to change to tell you that something happened. And then you hit connect, and usually everything works like it's supposed to. On your setup screen here, this will show you basics. Make sure that when you move the copter left to right, front to back, that it moves the right way when your accelerometer is on. Mine, all this stuff is disabled, so this screen setup here does nothing. So we'll go over to ports, and this one's important because this is where you're going to have to set up for your receiver and the OSD on the DJI unit to work. So my UART1, you click this guy to that number, whatever this guy is. The rest of these are all disabled. That's where my DJI is plugged into UART1, so all you do is check that box. Normally that's unchecked. And then because I run Spectrum Serial RX, or if you do run Serial RX, you're going to check the Serial RX tab for wherever that UART is, and I have that on UART3. So I do UART3, Serial X. UART1 is where I have the DJI hooked up to, so I check the configuration MSP tab. And that's all there is on ports. If you have other things, like you set up your pit switch and you reassign, you know, the UARTs and all that. That's what these are going to be used for. So configuration screen, this is a fun one. Make sure that you're on quad X before you do much. You can set your D shot over here. You can go up to D shot. There's Pro Shot now. I run D shot 600. It seems to be fine. I've tried them and I don't notice a huge difference with my flying. Quad X is where you want to be, and I run my motors what is considered reverse, and that's what this tab does. That means the props spin outward away from the lens, and the reason I do that is when you run into stuff, it tends to push the copter away from the crash instead of pulling it into the crash. Going down the list here, board alignment and sensor alignment. You don't have to make any changes here. This all defaults just fine. And then system configuration. I run it at 8K, 8K. I've tried up and down. Sometimes they work, sometimes they doesn't. So I've just been stuck at 8K, 8K here for a while, and everything seems to be all right. I turn off the sampling. I turn off the accelerometer, barometer, magnetometer. All that stuff doesn't apply to the type of flying that we're doing. And then personalization, this is your screen name on your OSD. I don't know why they put it in this tab, but here it is. If you want to put your name on this screen, you can put it in right here. And then you can do camera angle compensation. So if you want the Betaflight to tune around your camera angle and fly different, you can put in what your camera angle is here. The little bit that I played with that years ago, I didn't like it, so I've never really gone back to it. Receiver, nothing over on this side still. There's nothing happening there. The receiver is serial based because I run Spectrum, I do that, but it has all your choices here for whatever you got, and serial is what most of us run. And then you have your protocols for the various brands in this drop down. The Spectrum stuff can get a little confusing at times depending on what model of receiver you're using, and that might require a little bit of Googling. The old Spectrums are 1024, the kind of not so old but not so new Spectrums are Spectrum 2048, and then the newest stuff is Spectrum 2048 / SRXL for the newer style receivers. Most of the stuff I have is the older one, so I'm still on Spectrum 2048. RSS signal strength, I don't have any of that, so I don't check that. 3D features, I don't do that yet, so I don't do that, and I got no GPS. Other features, now the telemetry has to be checked on for the DJI unit to work, so don't forget that. And then you want to have your air mode, your OSD, and all of the other things that you like to do. I haven't messed with dynamic filter or ESC sensors or any of that. So I basically just run air mode and anti-gravity, and that seems to do the job just fine. The dynamic filtering, all that requires some more workarounds with CLIs and speed control stuff that I'm not that interested in just yet. Keep going down the list. Your beacons for your beeper and all that is the various things that the copter will beep for. You can turn this all on or all off, but for the most part, I like to be able to have a beeper, so I leave that on there. And then after you go through and make changes, don't forget you have to click save and reboot every single time. It's something I didn't mention on the first screen. So if you're going through and doing this step by step, make sure that each one of these pages you go through, you hit save and reboot. Next tab over here, power and battery. This stuff defaults okay. I like to change a couple little things. The minimum cell voltage and the warning voltage, I lower those to 3.1 to 3.3 so that I get a little bit more headroom in my voltage for sag out, stuff like that. You can leave it alone. It just gives you more warnings. You can lower it even further. It gives you less warnings. It's kind of a voltage safety that it pops up in your OSD and reminds you that your battery's dying. Your voltage meter and all your multipliers over here. These guys, voltage and amperage meter, this is how you correct the information. Well, the way that I do it is I plug a battery in, look at it up here, it'll show you the voltage that's being read, and then you can adjust the scale until they match what the voltage of the battery is with a voltmeter or with a cell checker. Usually they're pretty close. You had to go up or down a little bit. You see here all I had to do was adjust this to 111 versus I think it comes at 110. But that's the way I do it. And then to get the amp meter and everything right, it's a little more complicated. The way that I've always done it is I'll do a hover test, and I hover the copter for about a minute and look at the value that it shows me at the end of the screen. When I flip off the copter, it says the milliamps used, max amperage and stuff like that, and then I'll go recharge the battery and compare that. So it takes a little bit of time, but it works out pretty good. It's pretty safe. This way you're not really flying the copter around trying to figure this stuff or using batteries up too much. You just do it for about a minute long hover, and then you recharge it type of deal, and that usually is an easy way to set your amperage and your milliamps. Next one, and this is the golden goose of the settings, your PID screen. I don't even mess with this stuff. PIDs I leave default almost all of the time. About anything I do is I turn my rates down a little bit. I believe that this copter, I haven't done any tuning whatsoever. It's completely default, but I could be mistaken because it looks like it's been a minute since I've done this. You see, I'm on Betaflight 4.1.1, and I'm sure they've already got 4.2 out by now. But this is just a basic rundown that'll kind of get you started. There's filter settings. Again, I'm not really sure what all this does. I haven't taken the time to watch enough videos to figure out all this or want to tune. And when I fly around, it seems okay. So I'm not pushing the limits of anything. I'm just having a good time. So the PID screen, you'll find lots of other people that explain how to tune. There's a lot of good how to PID tune videos, what that stuff all means. These people understand it a whole lot better than I do. For the most part, if I don't like it, I'll turn my rates down a little bit to slow down the response. You lower super rate or RC rate, and that will slow these max velocity degrees down. And that's how some people tune. They base it off these max velocity numbers, and they get those to where they want them, and then they're pretty happy. And then if it's too, like RC Expo, is if you don't like the front of the stick feel, like initial response when you are first starting to put small movements in, RC Expo allows you to tone that down in Betaflight versus using your radio. So next one up, we're going to go to receiver, and this will show you if your radio is working. When the radio is turned on, you'll see the values move. You'll be able to set those. And one thing that's very important with Betaflight, you want to make sure that your centers are 1500 and your maxes are 1000 and 2000 on either end. A lot of radios, you're going to have to leave that alone. You won't have to do much. Some radios, you're going to have to adjust that so that it matches. Spectrum radios, I know I have to turn my treble up in all my channels. And then sometimes you have to go in and reverse and correct some channels too. So you want to check that is all correct here. That when you roll left, it moves left. When you pitch forward, it moves left. And when you yaw right, it moves right. That sort of stuff. There's a channel map, because you come in here and these aren't going to be affiliated with the right sticks. So first thing you're going to do is pick your right channel map. And for whatever radio you have, those are listed there. Got your RSSI channel for the radios that have the signal strength feedback to the system, or your OSD that tells you can set the channel here. And then there's lots of other settings here that control the endpoints of the setup so that you have thresholds for safeties and stuff like that. So you can adjust these to match your radio if you want to, or you can make your radio adjust these. I tend to like more travel than less, so I adjust my radio to match these. You have an RC deadband setting here, so if something's real twitchy, you can put in some deadband. And all of these other settings that I have no idea what they do, they have to do with the filtering stuff. And again, there's lots of other people out there that'll explain this stuff much better than I possibly could try to. So we move on to our modes screen, and this is where you can set your arming switch and lots of other fun things. Black box recordings, you can turn on and off the FPV angle mix. You can turn your beeper on and off. You can set turtle mode, or what is here is flip over after crash is what it's called. And that's where this all happens. So you'll assign the channel, and then you'll be able to see that move when you move the switch, and then you'll also be able to adjust the range for how it activates. So this is where you set your arm, your beeper, your turtle mode, and that's all I use. I just use turtle mode, I have a beeper, and I have arm, and I run my turtle mode and my beeper on the same one. So if my copter's upside down and I'm about to turtle mode, it's beeping before I arm it. So if anybody's walking over to flip it over, it'll be sitting there beeping, and they'll know, like, hey, you're beeping, what's going on here? At least, holler, I got it. Or, well, anyway. But if you have other things to set up, this is the screen for your switches. So we go over to motors, and this allows you to see how the motors run. It lets you check direction. You can do speed control testing and stuff like that. There's some safeties here. You take your props off. You got to check a box, and because it's going to run while it's plugged into the USB, and you definitely don't want your props in there. So this is more for, I guess, diagnosis and testing and stuff like that. And then we go over to our OSD, and this is where you set up what shows up on your screen. You got all your check boxes on your left-hand side here, and then you have all your warnings here that you can turn these off. You can drag these guys around the screen. Now, this looks a little janky because in conjunction with the DJI setup, it's not quite normal on the edges, I guess. It's a little off from the outer edges. So even though it's here, it's not quite lined up in the DJI just right. So I had to turn that on and move these around kind of while it was live. Again, more stuff you want to do with the props removed, of course. And then you can set all your displays at the end when you disarm what it shows the information, so you're not overloaded with stuff and you only want your good information that you're dealing with. You can also set your milliamps and all that stuff here for your runtime countdown to get that accurate. And your timers and all that stuff as well. You can change from PAL to NSC, metric imperial, all that fun stuff. And then black box, that's another one that I don't really use, so I'm not sure how any of that works. And CLI is something that I won't touch with a 10-foot pole in most situations, unless I have watched some very good how-to videos or someone has told me exactly how to do that. And so you can show all your settings in here. You push, I think it's dump, and it'll show you all of your settings. Like, this is practically like looking at the code for crying out loud. And you can get yourself to figure out what all of the settings are, so what you have access to, what they're set to, and you can have it display ranges, all sorts of cool stuff. So CLI is the back door, I guess you'd say, of Betaflight, and it allows you to fix all the stuff that the GUI or the interface doesn't allow. Oh, those are my basic settings for Betaflight and what I get my copter flying with. Remember, educate yourself. These are just my settings. It may not work for you. This is a very brief rundown. If you have an understanding of how drones and quadcopters work, this may help you a little bit. If you've never done this before, you're probably going to want a lot more information than I just provided for you. And there's lots of other good videos out there that are available from lots of really great FPV enthusiasts that are teaching brand new folks how to use this stuff as well. That's my Nerdbird setup. I'm always impressed by, I guess, people's reaction to this thing. I was camping this weekend. We went out with a bunch of bicycle enthusiast friends and some of our RC friends, and we did a camping trip out at Lossing's Landing, which is out on the coast here in California. It was, the weather was kind of iffy, but we decided to go for it anyway. It was windy all weekend, but I got to fly a handful of times. I'm going to put one of those clips at the end, I think, because it was a good time. And the reaction of folks when they see these things rip is always real good. I need to figure out how to get a DJI ride-along setup going, because that's the downside to the DJI right now, is there's no cheap monitor that I can just hand them to hold and see what I see. They're always got lots of questions. How do you do that? Where do you see where it's going? But anyway, good times. Yeah. We also do a podcast. It's called RC Stuff, powered by HOBBYWING. I co-host that with DRL world champion Jordan Temkin. So we got lots of cool stuff that we talk about, ranging from RC cars to drones and much, much more. Don't forget to check out our North America website, hobbywingdirect.com. If you have any questions, let us know. North America at hobbywing.com is our email address. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.